Another news story picked up by Kotaku this past week has once again led to another popular indie dev debate, and that is on the topic of the Steam refund policy or refund policies in general. And for today's critical thought, we're going to talk about why this is still a necessity, but why Steam's policy may not be the best answer for it. When it comes to Steam's policy on refunding games, I am 100% on the side that games or stores need to have a refund policy or some form of protection for consumers. The reason is that it grants a layer of protection and assurance for the consumer that they're not basically metaphorically throwing their money away. And there are a lot of games that I have bought over the years that I just did not enjoy, and I would be more than happy to have refunded them if the chance happened back then. But the problem where this argument lies is with that there is no such thing again as just one kind of video game. There are video games meant to be played for dozens if not hundreds of hours. Just there are games that are meant to be played for 3 minutes, 10 minutes. And the Kotaku article and the discussion on Twitter was regarding a horror game that was meant to be played within an hour to 2 hours. And what the developer found was that a lot of people were buying the game, finishing it, and then refunding it, essentially giving them a free game. And again, this once again spurred the whole argument over refunds are bad, they need to be gotten rid of, they're hurting indie developers, and so on and so forth. But the problem is that it's not that simple. As I said, for a lot of consumers out there, they're not going to buy a game if there's not some guarantee they're not going to waste their money on it. Too many people have been burned way too many times by games that may not be as amazing as your game if you're working on one right now. But again, it's that case of one rotten apple spoils the bunch. And without a refund policy, most people aren't going to take a chance, especially on the variety of experimental and unique indie games. There are plenty of games that I've bought, such as Library of Ruina, that if I didn't have that guarantee that if this game wasn't for me, why would I spend, I think it was like $30, maybe it was $25 on that game without any kind of guarantee on it? And the refund policy is essentially the consumer's strongest and, in many cases, only form of protection or insurance on the quality of the games that they buy. We've seen games released in very horrible states, games that were ported to the PC that had very little done to make them work. And if consumers couldn't refund those games, well, what other option do they have? Now, again, however, the problem when it comes to this in kind of the macro sense is that Steam, or of course by extension Valve, is trying to go for a one-size-fits-all approach. Do as little work as possible to get the most gain. But that is not the solution in this case. Like we've said, there are plenty of video games released that don't occupy the same kind of time length, the same kind of quality, and of course the same amount of price. No one's expecting to buy a 2-hour game and spend $60 on it. Conversely, spending, $2 on a 800-hour game seems kind of crazy for that price to value ratio. And again, there is no one-size-fits-all when it comes to pricing in the game industry. Any developer who says they figure it out is a liar. And unfortunately, that's just the nature of the beast. But where this gets into trouble again is that a lot of people equate time to value. If a game gives me 50 hours of content, surely it is 10 times better than a game that only gave me 5 hours of content. And of course, every indie developer watching this right now just got a pain in their chest after I said that. And as we've seen, especially the last 5 to 6 years, is that a lot of people prefer quality over quantity. I don't want to spend 100 hours playing a just okay game. I'd rather spend 10 hours playing an amazing one-of-a-kind experience. But when it comes to how this all factor into Steam, A one-size-fits-all policy doesn't work. If we were to kind of very broadly define games, we could put them on a very basic scale of micro-level games, minutes to maybe at most 2 hours. We have kind of your standard experience of maybe an 8 to 10 hour long game. We have something a little bit longer, maybe a 30 to 40 hour game, maybe like an RPG open world game. And then we have the extreme examples, 80 hours plus, your MMOs, your grand strategies, games that you are not even meant to even experience a quarter of them in a single sitting. And the problem with these two spectrums is that a 2-hour window to refund a game doesn't work for all these games. For the 8 to 10 hour, maybe 20 to 40 hour games, yeah, that's reasonable. For a game that's meant to be played in 30 minutes, a 2-hour window is essentially a free game. But conversely, a 2-hour window for an 80 to 100 hour game is nothing. If you give me a 2-hour window for like a Stellaris or a Total War game, you might as well just give me 20 seconds, because that's as much value I'm going to be able to get out of the game within that time span. And this is another major point about why refund policy is important. It allows people to try out these games. Because again, for a game that you are not familiar with at all, or a massive experience, you need that window just to be able to figure out, is this a game that I like? But again, for let's say a genre like a platformer, you'll know that maybe 10 to 20 minutes of that game is for you. So herein lies the problem. How do you fix a refund policy like this? Can you kind of alter it, or do you need more things surrounding it? Now, I can think of essentially two immediate solutions that would help, but would be completely useless. Uselessly helpful, is that safely extreme? The first one is essentially every game is required to have a demo. Remove the refund policy, get every game a demo, you play the demo, if you like it, you buy the full game, you don't like it, you don't. Of course, there's a bit of a problem with that. That would be completely horrible for everyone involved. Because like we've said, demos are hard to make. Not every genre can make a very bite-sized, punchy demo that's going to get you to play it. Again, what would a demo of a grand strategy or a MMO or a 200-hour plus experience would look like? And the other point is that in a lot of cases, it's better to have no demo than release a bad demo. Because a bad demo is basically anti-marketing. People have a horrible time with your demo. Why would they spend $30 on your full game? Now, the other solution that some people have been talking about is make it achievement or progression based. So let's say if your game has 30 achievements and if you hit 15 of 30, the refund policy ends. Or you must complete X amount of the game for that achievement or for the refund policy to basically cancel itself. The problem with that, of course, is that one, that could be very exploitable. Start your game, have 20 achievements at the start, back in all the other 20 achievements, 5 hours in, you can't refund your game. Then there's the idea of having this added stress of playing games, seeing this countdown go, you now have 10 achievements left before the refund policy ends. Now you have 8. Now there's only 1 achievement left, and then you can't refund the game. Again, the problem with automated systems is that anything that's automated can usually be exploited either by the consumers, developers, or both in some way, shape, or form. But I do agree that there needs to be a better way of handling this. And I have some thoughts I want to share with everyone, and we're going to do that after this quick break. And as always, if you're interested in my books on design, be sure to check out my latest offerings. For entry-level students, we have 20 essential games to study, and then the Game Design Deep Dive series that takes an extensive look at different genres, with horror coming by the end of 2021. Another reason why the refund policy is so important, that I want to talk about before we get to this next topic, is unfortunately we've seen kind of developers, not the most reputable ones, kind of trying to bloat their game out. We've said before about how much things are front-loaded in terms of cutscenes, story, bombastic imagery, all designed to pad out a game. And part of the problem with having this one-size-fits-all policy is that for a lot of developers, it kind of becomes the hoop they need to jump through in order to best sell their game. That if they create a very high quality experience that comes at maybe an hour and 50, it may be worth it to extend a level a little bit longer or add another cutscene or two to bump it over that 2-hour period. And this is definitely harmful to the developer side. And that, again, raises this question. What should be done? Because, again, at the end of the day, there has to be a refund policy. If that goes away, it is going to hurt a lot more developers than it's going to help them. But a one-size-fits-all one doesn't necessarily work. And I have a few ideas on this I'd like to run through with everybody, and let me know what you think about them in the comments below. So I think the first thing is that developers should be required to give an estimated play length. It kind of is part of your job as a developer to understand just how long it takes to play your game. And again, we can be very generous or very strict on it. But if a game takes, an hour to 3 hours, that should warrant a different refund policy than a game that takes 20 to 30 hours, or again, 50 to 80, or anything along those lines. Because part of the challenge of this kind of discussion is that, again, people will play through games differently. If you are a master platformer player, it's very easy for you to just blow through an entire game. A game that could take 10 hours, you could maybe beat it in 3 or 4. But if you're new to a game, such as if you're new to a Souls-like or a grand strategy game or anything else along those lines, you are going to need more time to learn it. This is why, again, that a 2-hour window means different things for different people. Some people will load up a game, try it for 20 seconds and go, "This is not for me," hit the refund button. Just as somebody may go up until the hour and 59 mark to get as much out of this game to figure out, okay, is this game for me? Yes/no. And I think we need to have this discussion about setting a variable refund policy. Like, if your game is only an hour or 2 hours long, I think 30 minutes is more than reasonable to get a good point about it. But, again, if your game is like 80 to 100 hours plus, maybe that refund policy should be bumped up to 5 to 10 hours. Because, again, 5 to 10 hours in a grand strategy game or a 100-hour plus RPG may just be the intro and 1 to 2 dungeons. I know, the first 10 hours when I played Persona 5 were pretty much just the preamble to that game. And again, the point is that the player shouldn't feel like the refund policy is like the Grim Reaper reaching out to them, this ever-present force saying, "Oh, you only have an hour left. You only have 50 minutes left. You gotta decide. It shouldn't work like that. But again, for a developer side, this shouldn't be that if somebody rushes through your game, they essentially get a free video game. And again, what we're talking about is besides the point of quality or length, that it should be just as fair to somebody who has a 20-hour game, just as somebody who put everything they had into a 40-minute to an hour-long micro game. Now, the other solution that I have that I think would be amazing, but also quite possibly completely out of scope, would be to have something like, a kind of Steam shareware feature, where you can download and buy a game, and the game will have kind of a limit built into the back of it, that once you hit it, Steam will pop up a notification saying, "Hey, you've reached the end of the trial version or the shareware version. do you want to keep playing this? Yes/no. If you say no, the game refunds. You say yes, the price or the game locks in. And at that point, you can't refund it past it. And of course, this would be on a game-by-game basis. Again, for an hour to 2 hour long game, this could kick in within 20 to 30 minutes. If this is a 100-hour long game, you could maybe play 10 to 15 hours. But again, of course, the problem, as I'm sure everyone is aware of, is that it's going to require either a very advanced algorithm or somebody literally to play each and every one of these games to figure out what that, time limit should be. Because again, we can't go by genre. There are 10 to 20 hour long RPGs just as there are 50 to 100 hour long ones. There are games that are meant to be short. There are games that are meant to be long. And again, just trying to say every RPG gets a 10-hour refund policy doesn't work. And I understand again that companies don't want manual systems like this. Because again, every game, or there are 10 to 30 games being released daily these days. And it would just be way too much to ask somebody to play them all and do it. And again, if we leave it up to the developers may not be the best representation. If a developer is a master level player of their game, they may say, oh, you can figure this whole thing out in 20 minutes, where a novice may take a few hours. And again, I think no matter how we set this up, it is not going to be 100% perfect. No system is going to work 100% of the time like this. We're working on XCOM logic. But there needs to be protection for the consumer, just as there needs to be something as, like a roll cage or a safety harness for developers. That if a developer releases a short game, that people aren't going to immediately refund it. And that takes me to one final point that I need to mention. The vast majority of consumers are not going to refund your game. And this may be more of the optimist in me, but I've heard from developers who have released short games, and people who genuinely enjoy them, they're not going to refund them. Even if the game was 30 minutes long, an hour long, whatever. That if they got their money's worth, they're not going to refund it. But there are going to be people who are going to buy a game for, achievement collecting purposes, Steam card collecting purposes, like whatever. And they're going to refund your game the second they've had their fill or they've gotten all that stuff. And again, I kind of feel like this equates to the piracy argument that a lot of AAA developers try to throw out, that piracy ruins video games. Everyone's just going to pirate your game, you'll make no money. And what we found is that is not the case. There are going to be people who will pirate every game. I have ran into them in my life. And guess what? They were never going to buy your game to begin with. There are people out there who will just consume games, just consume them. And whether they spent $1 or $0 on your game, they have no intention of supporting you going forward. They are essentially non or negative elements of what you can consider to be your fan base or your consumer base. You're not going to be able to convert them. You're not going to be able to convince them to give you money no matter how cheap your game is. And unfortunately, you can't rely on them for any decision making regarding the price, value, or refund policy of your game. And I feel like with this situation with the developer that was getting brought by indie developers and Kotaku, that there's more to the story than just people refund this game and I need to leave the industry because of it. And part of this, I think, comes from analyzing so many games, and part of this is just, I think, my pessimistic self. That if the refund policy is enough to ruin your game and your company, I hate to say this, but I feel like there's something else that is causing this failure, and it's not the refund policy to it. Again, is the refund policy the perfect system that works for everybody? No. But if this is what you are judging as the sole metric as to why your game failed, I feel like we're not getting the whole story. And this is something, again, that we've discussed at length on our Sunday shows, on Indie Inquiries, and so on, that very little has to go wrong for your game to fail, and a lot has to go right for it to succeed. And a lot of developers, I feel, have a lot of trouble understanding why a game succeeded or failed. And again, something tells me we're not getting the whole picture here. I'm sure Kotaku doesn't really do too much digging in beyond just the expose here. That, yes, if a game has a higher than normal refund rate, I don't feel like that's the only reason why this game is not doing well. And we can certainly analyze any game here on the channel, especially its store page, and see where things went wrong. But more often than not, one thing is not the doom and gloom of your game and your studio. It could certainly attribute to it, but we rarely see these days a developer doing 99 things right, doing one thing wrong, and their entire company collapses. As we've said, it's more often or not, doing things consistently right, that means you're doing more things right and you're going to succeed, or you're messing up, you're continuing to mess up, things aren't going right, and the downward spiral happens there. But with that said, we're kind of getting off topic. So for those of you watching, what do you think about the refund policy on Steam? And especially, let me know if you're a consumer or a developer, because I feel this is one of those topics that kind of separates people based on it. And if you were in charge of this at Valve, how would you handle the refund rate for these games? And again, the answer cannot be no refund policy, because we cannot go back to that. With all that said, thank you so much for watching. As always, check out our Discord and Patreon. Do all the smashing and liking and licking, whatever else people do on social media these days. And come back for daily discussions on game design here and on game wisdom, where some of the art and science of games. Until next time, take care.